Picture this. You wake up one morning and you are fast. Not athlete fast, not car fast. You are moving at the speed of sound before you even finish breakfast. By the time you reach the front door, you have already lapped the entire city block. The world around you has turned into a frozen photograph. Birds hang motionless in the air. Raindrops sit suspended like glass beads. You are the only thing moving in a world that has stopped. This is the fantasy. This is what every Flash comic, every Flash TV episode, every animated short sells you in the first 30 seconds. Speed is liberation. Speed is power. Speed as the cleanest, most elegant superpower ever conceived. No mutations, no radioactive side effects, no complicated magic. Just pure, frictionless velocity. Here is what nobody tells you. The human body was not built for any of this, not even close. Speed at the scale the Flash operates does not feel like liberation. It feels like standing inside a blast furnace while someone fires a cannon directly into your chest every single second. The physics that make the Flash look effortless on screen are the exact same physics that would turn a real human body into biological wreckage within the first 100 meters. Today we are going to break down exactly what would happen, not in a comic, not on a screen, in reality, with real human anatomy, real physics, and the actual documented science of what extreme speed does to biological tissue. We are going to look at 4 mechanisms, each one worse than the last, that would systematically destroy Barry Allen from the inside out. By the end of this video, you will understand why the Flash is not just unrealistic. He is a biological impossibility wearing a red suit. Let's start with the ground beneath his feet. The leg problem. Every time a human foot hits the ground during a run, the leg absorbs a force equivalent to roughly 2 to 3 times the runner's body weight. Elite sprinters, the fastest humans alive, generate ground reaction forces of around 800 to 1,000 kilograms per step at peak speed. Their bones, tendons, and muscles are specifically adapted over years of training to absorb and redirect that force without catastrophic failure. Even then, stress fractures, torn Achilles tendons, and snapped hamstrings are among the most common injuries in professional sprinting, and these athletes are running at roughly 10 to 12 meters per second. The Flash runs at speeds that the comics place anywhere from Mach 1 to many times the speed of light, depending on which storyline you are reading. Even at the conservative end, let us say Mach 1, which is roughly 340 meters per second, the math becomes immediately horrifying. Ground reaction force scales with the rate of acceleration. The faster you move, the harder each foot strike hits, because you are covering more distance per step, and each foot is in contact with the ground for a shorter period of time, meaning the same total force gets compressed into a smaller and smaller window. At Mach 1, the force transmitted through a human leg with each stride would not just exceed what bone can handle, it would exceed it by an order of magnitude. The tibia, the main load-bearing bone of the lower leg, can withstand compressive forces of roughly 8,000 to 10,000 newtons before fracturing. At supersonic running speeds, the estimated ground reaction force per step would be measured in the hundreds of thousands of newtons. Barry Allen's legs would not slow down gradually from fatigue. They would shatter on the first stride. The bones would not crack. They would fragment, because the force arriving through the foot would be moving faster than the structural failure response can propagate through the bone itself. He would not feel his legs give out. He would simply be running, and then he would not be, because his lower body would no longer exist in a form capable of supporting weight. The suit would not help. Fabric does not redistribute ground reaction force. Even the most advanced carbon fiber running prosthetics used by Paralympic athletes are specifically engineered to store and release energy, and they fail at forces far below what Mach 1 sprinting would generate. There is no material currently known to engineering that could be worn on a human leg and survive that load cycle, because the limiting factor is not the suit. It is the bone inside it. The air problem. Let us say someone solves the leg problem. Let us assume some future material science produces a leg brace capable of surviving supersonic foot strikes. There is a second problem waiting at the surface of Barry Allen's skin, and it begins the moment he accelerates past roughly 40 meters per second. Air resistance. At low speeds, air resistance is a mild inconvenience. Cyclists crouch to reduce drag. Swimmers wear streamlined suits. Runners tuck their arms. These are optimizations against a force that, at human speeds, costs you a small percentage of your energy output. At supersonic speeds, air resistance is not an inconvenience. It is a wall. The drag force on an object moving through air scales with the square of velocity. Double your speed and drag quadruples. Triple your speed and drag increases ninefold. At Mach 1, the aerodynamic drag force on a human-sized object running upright would be measured in the tens of thousands of newtons. This is roughly equivalent to running into a solid concrete barrier at full sprint, continuously, with every single step. But drag force is only half of the problem. The other half is heat. When an object moves through air at supersonic speeds, it compresses the air molecules in front of it faster than they can move out of the way. That compression generates heat, the same phenomenon that turns spacecraft into fireballs during atmospheric re-entry. The SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built, had its titanium airframe reach temperatures above 300 degrees Celsius during sustained Mach 3 flight. Barry Allen is not titanium. He is approximately 80 kilograms of water, protein, and fat, wrapped in a thin layer of skin. Human skin begins to suffer thermal damage at 48 degrees Celsius. At supersonic speeds, the air temperature at the surface of his body would reach hundreds of degrees within seconds of acceleration. The friction would not burn his suit, it would burn him, directly, because no wearable suit material thin enough to allow the range of motion required for running provides meaningful thermal insulation against aerodynamic heating at those speeds. The Flash at Mach 1 is not running through air. He is running through a continuous blowtorch aimed directly at his face, his chest, and every exposed surface of his body. The red suit is decorative. Physics is not. The brain problem. Now let's talk about what is happening inside Barry Allen's skull while all of this is going on. The human brain is the most metabolically demanding organ in the body. It accounts for roughly 2% of body weight, but consumes around 20% of total energy output at rest. During intense physical exertion, that demand increases further. The brain requires a continuous, uninterrupted supply of oxygenated blood to function. Interrupt that supply for 4 to 6 seconds and consciousness begins to fail. Interrupt it for longer and brain cells start dying. Running at supersonic speed creates two simultaneous and contradictory demands on the cardiovascular system. The legs require an extraordinary volume of oxygenated blood to power the muscular contractions needed to maintain that speed. The brain simultaneously requires its own continuous supply to process the sensory information coming in at a rate that increases proportionally with speed. At Mach 1, Barry Allen is covering 340 meters every second. In that same second, his visual system needs to process the entire environment ahead of him, identify obstacles, calculate trajectories, and generate motor commands to adjust his path, all faster than any human nervous system can currently operate. The human visual processing system has a temporal resolution of roughly 60 frames per second under optimal conditions. Some research suggests trained athletes can process closer to 80 to 100 frames per second in specific contexts. At Mach 1, the time available to perceive, process, and react to an obstacle 1 meter ahead is approximately 3 milliseconds. The human neural conduction velocity, the speed at which a signal travels from the eye to the brain and back down to the legs as a motor command, is roughly 70 meters per second in the fastest nerve fibers. That round trip takes far longer than 3 milliseconds. Barry Allen at Mach 1 is functionally blind, not because his eyes stop working, because the gap between what he sees and when his brain can act on it is longer than the time it takes him to cover the distance between himself and whatever he is about to run into. He is not navigating the environment. He is a supersonic projectile pointed in a direction and hoping nothing is in the way. At any speed above roughly 60 meters per second, a human nervous system cannot react in time to avoid a stationary obstacle detected at close range. Barry Allen running through a city at Mach 1 would not be a hero weaving between pedestrians. He would be a biological missile detonating against the first building he encountered, because his brain would detect it and issue a correction command that would arrive at his legs approximately 100 meters after he had already hit it. The heart problem. Everything above assumes Barry Allen's cardiovascular system can keep up with what his body is demanding. It cannot. The heart is a muscle. Like all muscles, it has a maximum contraction rate, and that rate is hardwired into human physiology by the electrical conduction system of the heart itself. The maximum human heart rate is approximately 220 beats per minute for most adults, with elite athletes occasionally reaching slightly higher under extreme conditions. At that rate, the heart is already operating at the edge of what cardiac muscle tissue can sustain without damage. Now consider what the Flash's body would actually require during a supersonic sprint. Skeletal muscle oxygen demand during intense exercise increases by roughly 100 times compared to rest. At supersonic speeds, that demand would increase by orders of magnitude beyond anything human physiology has ever been required to supply. The heart would need to pump blood at a rate that exceeds its maximum capacity by so far that the comparison becomes meaningless. But cardiac output is not the only issue. Blood itself has physical properties that become relevant at extreme flow rates. At very high velocities through the vascular system, blood behaves less like a smooth fluid and more like a turbulent one, creating shear forces against the walls of blood vessels. These shear forces damage the endothelial cells lining the arteries. At high enough flow velocities, they rupture the vessels entirely. This is the same mechanism behind aortic dissection, one of the most immediately fatal cardiovascular events a human can experience, where the layers of the aortic wall separate under pressure. Barry Allen's heart, pumping at whatever impossible rate supersonic running would demand, would not just fail from exhaustion. It would generate internal blood pressures that would rupture his own arteries from the inside, not from an external impact, from the speed of his own blood trying to keep up with him. The real conclusion. So here is what you actually have when you put all four of these together. A man whose legs shatter on the first stride, whose skin combusts from aerodynamic heating before he clears the first block, whose brain cannot process information fast enough to avoid running into a wall, and whose own heart would tear his arteries apart, trying to keep him alive through any of it. The Flash is not impossible, because the writers got lazy. He is impossible because speed, at the scale he operates, is one of the most hostile physical environments a biological organism can be placed in. Every system in the human body, the skeletal system, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the integumentary system, fails at supersonic speeds for reasons that are specific, documented, and non-negotiable. The comics solve this with the Speed Force, a fictional energy field that handwaves every single one of these problems simultaneously. And that is fine, that is what fiction is for. But strip the Speed Force away, and what you have left is not a superhero. It is a man-shaped object, moving too fast to survive being itself. Evolution gave Barry Allen the one thing that actually matters at human speeds. A nervous system precise enough to thread a needle, coordinate both hands independently, and recognize a human face in a fraction of a second. We traded supersonic legs for the most sophisticated biological computer on the planet. That is not a bad trade. It just does not look as good in a red suit.